sort of official thing, do I have your permission to use the content we create here, this recording in whole and in part, and share it out over social media?
Yes.
Leonard, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
My name is Leonard Sturdivant with Hiring Solutions. I am a psychologist by training and marriage and family therapy trained psychologist. And I have a company that looks at personality assessments driven by AI technology.
Cool, cool. Interesting. If you can't answer it without a pre-rehearsed question, then you shouldn't really be calling yourself an expert, because there's a flood of those in social media. As a psychologist, you've seen you like telling you everything he knows about psychology. It was like, no, no, that's grade one, that's kindergarten, and it's only true under these conditions. And yes, I know that makes you lots of money, but you're full of crap.
That part, and he has a lot of followers. So
Yes.
who drink the Kool-Aid? So
Everybody wants a simple answer because our brain would rather have a simple, conclusive answer. But the world is a universe more complicated than that. And it's
certainly,
like, under X conditions, this is true. But what about this? And taken too far, it now doesn't work at all, you know?
right.
And that doesn't sell well on social media. It's a real trick to give real information that really works in the real world and have it well received because it's not simple.
Right.
I'd like to fire through the questions. Please feel free to take as long as you want to answer them. That
Okay.
is, if you've got depth to give, that's awesome. I love that. It teaches me, it teaches the audience. What questions do you think we should be asking ourselves about transforming organizational culture and leadership?
The best leader has always been the best servant. If you're not looking into ways to improve how you serve those you lead, then the danger is remaining stuck in technologies and theories and things that are not able to keep up with modern day business demands. So you should be constantly looking to improve, constantly looking to upgrade, constantly looking at what's out there that will make the business better and give you a platform to be better able to serve.
What are the most significant challenges you face in transforming organizational culture and leadership?
Well, back in 2016, I remember I was writing my dissertation and I decided to do my dissertation on narcissism. This is in the middle of Trump. Trump had just won,
Wow.
and I thought it would be fascinating to look at how narcissism impacts marriages. Funny thing is, hiring and getting married are so intertwined that you should probably follow the same protocols. Only difference is in business, you can do reconnaissance and have somebody come and do personality assessments. When you're getting married, you don't have the same tools. Well, you do, but rarely are they used. So as I was writing this dissertation, I found 3,000 narcissists that the government had already done some previous studies, and so I kind of extrapolated the data and massaged it and came up with my dissertation theory was narcissism causes divorce. Everybody goes, well, yeah, that's true. That's crazy. I said, well, I actually got the numbers to make it true. I see the numbers, and after a while, what began to happen was these patterns began to emerge, and I thought it was really interesting. Now, at the time, the Department of Human Development at Virginia Tech was kind of loaded with narcissists, right? So as I was doing this dissertation, everybody was discouraging me, oh, then you shouldn't do that, and as I say, these patterns started to show up. The guy who was the program director at the time had been married 3 times. And I'm going, you're in a marriage and family therapy program, PhD program as a program director, and you've been married thrice. I said, hmm. And one of the patterns that emerged is the fish stinks from the head down. So when I'm looking at corporations, my focus is looking at the C-suite, how it influences the rank and the file. Because when people leave jobs, they leave because management. Somebody in management was crazy. I couldn't get anything done. I was being harassed or being bullied. That bullying, harassment are all, if you trace it all the way back to these people, they're kind of narcissistic. So I just started to see these patterns starting to emerge, and I thought it was fascinating, and I started to capture some of the information as I was writing the dissertation, and it was quite interesting. And so I was able to take that skill set and bring it in from academia to corporate, and it I could superimpose it onto the corporate world, and the same patterns started to emerge. And I just thought it was really fascinating. And I just went all the way down the rabbit hole until I came up with doing personality assessments.
I
So
love that. So I want to ask you, since narcissism causes divorce, or the evidence shows that narcissism probably causes divorce. Okay, what is the equivalent? Narcissism in corporate causes what?
bullying is one of them. It causes people to leave. And it's funny because the people who leave the job, your nurturers, your empaths, your introverts, what began to emerge is that it's like, okay, the people who are leaving were the ones who care, the ones who really wanted to do the job, and they were always being bullied, and you can't show up a narcissist if you are uh, narcissistic and there's somebody in your periphery that's smarter than you or more intelligent than you, then they become a threat to your authority.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in an authority position and people in your periphery are smarter than you, it shouldn't be a threat to your authority. Shouldn't be. If it is, then you have absolutely no business being a leader.
Right. Okay. So I want to expand out from that. So if narcissism ultimately causes divorce, what would you say would be the larger sort of common impact?
Right. So the decline in the culture is certainly a subset of having people in your space who fit those characteristics. The main thing, though, which is what DEI is trying to address, is you start to lose money because you are no longer relatable to the people who are calling in. You need different facets to address the population. You can't just be in one lane. You need to have multiple lanes, which seems to be the suggestion of DEI. And
Okay.
as you start to lose money and culture starts to decline, then the board of trustees are going to get involved and say, hey, we're losing money this quarter. We're going to have to do something different. And you see this CEO shuffle. I've seen CEOs shuffle in and out of companies. I've seen go from company to company trying to course correct. And it's interesting because they get in these companies and then they rinse and repeat. So, you've got two kinds of CEOs. You've got the ones who are empathic and the ones who are not. And the ones who are empathic, those companies seem to do better
Hmm.
because they're more compassionate, they're more empathic, and they're more nurturing. And versus the authoritarian style of, I say it, you do it, you don't like it, get out. Very
Yeah.
linear thinking, because as a leader, you have more choices in the middle, right? Not on the extreme ends.
Hmm.
And I try to, the CEOs I am coaching, I try to get them to move towards the middle.
So can you elaborate a little bit about what you mean in the middle? Are you talking about like business or market circumstances or something else?
If you were to take a bell curve, right,
Hmm.
split right down the middle is where you should be. You have more choices. If I'm all the way over to the left of the bell curve, I don't have a lot of choices. They're very linear
Right.
responses: black, white, in, out, up, down, yes, no, left,
So you're
right.
talking about in terms of the middle, you're talking about the middle in terms of the way you lead, that is
Correct.
having more choices and being more adaptive to the situation rather than being a pushover on one end and um, Trump on the other.
He is the central figure that I use a lot because his patterns are fairly predictable.
Like, let's be straight up about it. He's a very good exemplar for what it means to be a narcissist. You know,
He is, and my professional opinion, I think that he is comorbid with something else. It ain't just narcissism. He
oh,
got some other stuff cooking. So
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm on the same page with you there. Thank you for elaborating in terms of the opportunity to have sort of more options and lead depending on the circumstances rather than saying, here is the way I deal with things. I fire
right.
people who disagree with me would be 2, 3 standard deviations out.
That's right. Very,
Okay,
very linear in terms of thinking. Yeah, there's no, left, right, in, out. Yeah, there's no
right.
middle. You either do
Okay,
this. Right.
right. Okay, thank you. So the next one is, could you describe a recent situation where you felt that a leader could have benefited from additional training in culture building, leadership, or both?
Normally, when that starts to happen, they change CEOs. It seems like there was a CEO who had made a declarative that you either do it this way, and people started to quit. They were
Hmm.
quitting left and right. I can't think of the story, but it was a CEO who had made a declarative to his people that you're either going to do it this way or that way, and a lot of people
Right.
started to quit, and I'm like, whoa,
So,
you can't dictate that. Mhm.
right. So the gist was he basically made an ultimatum. It was my way or the highway kind of statement.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
let's see what happens if we spin the wheel and what the question comes up with.
okay.
So, okay, this is mostly a silly one, but what the heck? Let's do it. What did you
Yeah.
name your first car?
I was 15 when I got my first car. It was a Pontiac Bonneville '69. It was Lucille. There you go. It was after the guitar of B.B. King.
What specific outcomes would you hope to achieve through training in leadership and culture building?
Outcomes would be cohesiveness. And what I'm beginning to see a pattern that's starting to emerge is that people who have similar personalities are going to work well together. But when you have a multiplicity of different personalities, it turns into cat herding. So
Mhm.
when we all have similar personalities, it clicks. It's like you get people who play well with each other in the sandbox.
Mhm.
And I think that's really the outcome that I strive for when I'm doing a consultation to get your range in a 25% range. That way you kind of minimize surprises. These people play well with one another. And what I'm finding out is another pattern that emerges is that the more mature you are, the more adult energy you're in, the less mature you are, you're in this child energy. And we go in and out of energies all day long. If I'm at work, you kind of want to stay in this adult energy.
Mhm.
I'm not high, I'm not low, I'm just kind of keeping it right in the middle. So that child energy, however, that's when things get cooking. The grievance culture, you gossip. All these are all kind of child energies, and gossip is all. This isn't about the gossip. It is look at me, I got something valuable to give you, right?
Mhm.
So it's amazing how we bring all of our stuff from home and we replicate it at work so your brain can experience homeostasis. I got drama at home. I got drama at work. My brain's like, okay, everything's normal. If I don't have drama at home and I don't have any drama at work, then your brain goes, okay, we've achieved homeostasis. If I have drama at home and I don't have drama at work, I'll drum up something to get it cooking because I want to feel normal.
Hmm.
So I've seen that play out. It's not pretty.
I think of it slightly differently, but I have a word, some 70s musician, and the title of their album was the same as what I describe as sort of a dysfunctional workplace culture, which is vulture culture. Had survival value, but like eating junk food all day, we are never without those sort of emotions, those baser instincts, which have some function, but in our prefrontal cortex is where we get the grown-up energy, and
Processing, yes.
they can play well together, but that's sort of almost like a Buddhist monk kind of thing.
Mm,
We have to be mindful, and we have to make those choices. The authors of Nudge, they talked about the elephant and the rider, and that the adult energy, to use your term, would be more like the rider, that is self-control, intellectual reasoning, and the elephant. But the elephant is stronger, so that there has to be there are certain approaches like forming habits, anticipating challenges before they happen, before the emotions come in, and then subvert
yes,
our ability to reason, things like that, which you'd
yes.
be probably pretty familiar with given the work you do.
Yeah, limbic system. Yeah.
Regarding the cohesiveness, I wanted to also address that a little bit. I think that's really interesting. One of the bad things about being too much alike, you're talking about overlap. When you're talking about the 25%, you're saying people who are sufficiently overlapping in certain personality traits to be able to get along without a lot of conflict. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
You see it all the time in social groups, not just in corporate settings, but in social groups. It's like this group has a certain vibe or a certain culture because in the classroom as a teacher, I see it. There's a collective personality of the group. You get some high energy, outgoing people is actually a good thing, especially if you have too many low energy introverts, that you put them together and they, the ADHD guy like me raises the energy and outgoingness of the room, and the more introverted quiet people lower it, so you get something closer to what you're talking about in the middle, where the right group with complementary but not too extreme personality traits is much better. And one of the things though that happens if we seek too much cohesiveness is we get groupthink, we get carbon copies of ourselves, which is what most people hire if they're not mindfully managing for that. They go, oh well, this person has this and this, somehow I like those traits. It's like, yeah, those are the traits you have. And it goes to what you're saying. So James Surowiecki talked about it in The Wisdom of Crowds. The collective intelligence of a group, the number one variable that actually predicts the intelligence of a group as a collective unit for coming up with solutions and giving good solutions to things, is the diversity in the group, which in some sense is against cohesiveness, right? Like, you need, the more diversity you have in a group, the more likely you're going to be able to come up with better and more diverse solutions. But
Mhm.
that also means you're going to have to manage that diversity. That is, you're going to have probably lower cohesiveness. So it's like most things, it's an optimization problem. You can't be too similar, you can't be too different. Either one could be a real problem.
But you're talking about two things. When DEI talks about diversity, I got a guy from Japan, I got a guy from Mexico, I got a guy
Hmm.
from Sweden, I got a guy from all these different diverse cultures. Great.
Hmm.
Within those diverse cultures, how many of them share a similar personality?
Right.
So I think the diversity thing works. However, I think it works better if our personalities are close
Hmm.
versus them being 180 degrees apart. I think that's when it gets kind of tricky because now
Right.
You know, you could be we're diverse culturally, but we're not close in personality. So we're going to have some conflicts.
Right.
And I'm saying with the personality assessment, you can now address, you know, those things that make it work. And conversely, marriages that work, the two people are really close. It's not a really big wide swing. Opposites attracts, that's true, but opposites don't stay married. It's cute.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. I can think of relationships I've been in where, yeah, it's both, but absolutely there has to be a core similarity. I love that you brought in the cultural diversity because that's what everybody thinks of as diversity, and that's kind of an oversimplification, and you identified that. It's there's two kinds of diversity. There's diversity in terms of you know, culture, ethnicity, education, life
Sure,
experience, as well as personalities. And the argument that comes out of the wisdom of crowds is that all types of diversity, if you put them together, that is diversity of any of those things, like an outgoing Japanese person is not a unicorn, but they are less common because there is cultural reinforcement and praise for being reserved, shy, seeking consensus with the group. Basically, in a lot of ways, not thinking for yourself. It's like, I have my own thoughts, but I'm not going to express them until I find out what everybody else thinks about this.
wow.
There's literally a term for it in Japanese business, and it has strengths and weaknesses. And they call it nimawashi, and it's to trim around the roots of the bonsai. So in an organization, that means let's check what this thing we want to do, this change we want to make to the organization, to our department, how it impacts everyone else before we draw a final conclusion.
Hmm.
And this manifests in two really interesting ways. One is that for COVID-19, it was fantastic because tranquility, peacefulness, group cohesion is a big thing. We never had to go into any sort of forced lockdown of any kind whatsoever during COVID. Here's the flip side. So, you know, ultra planning means for ultra efficiency, except, and here's where the lower diversity, the sort of lack of diversity in thinking or checking with everybody else first falls apart. When something falls outside of the box of the incredible, detailed, efficient planning that makes everything go really well, when it falls outside the box, nobody knows what to do.
Predictability. That and that I like that. And it the bell curve just popped up in my mind as you said. So we're all going to be within we're going to make this decision based on the what's in the bell of the curve, and it makes things predictable. Outside of that, the further away from the bell you get, the less predictable it is, and you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. So
Right. And that's not something that's rewarded here. So if I talk to, and I've done this literally hundreds or thousands of times, if I'm talking to an English student, whether it's a C-suite English student or a young teenager, one of the main things, the vast majority of them, unless they're extremely outgoing by Japanese standards, um, would be, I'm shy. Literally, it's the default virtue. I'm shy. So therefore, when we're talking about um, diversity within a culture, they have a saying about this in Japan, and this is a real saying: the peg or the nail that stands out gets pounded down. It is that culturally entrenched, and like I said, with the strengths of that, but also the weakness of less diversity means by definition less group and collective intelligence. So I'm going to sort of wrap this up back to what we were saying. Cultural diversity is unto itself an oversimplification. When we're talking about diversity, you know, DEI always becomes about race, ethnicity, culture, gender identity. It's like, screw that. Let's talk about diversity in its broadest sense. And the more diverse a crowd is, whether they're non-binary, whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they're well-educated, whether they're a working class person, you put all those people together, and
Yikes.
with different personality types, as long as you can make it work, and this is what comes to your overlap, so you can make it work, the more diverse your group is, the more intelligent they are. And this is to the point that when Sir Wiki did a talk, the gist was if you take 1,000 people, found all the smartest math geeks in the room, we put them in one group. Then we took all of the rest of the people in that sample and we grouped them only by diversity in the broadest sense of the word. And under those conditions, I believe it was when you gave everyone a math problem. So this is the math geeks wheelhouse. The diversity groups outperformed the math geeks in math 90% of the time.
Wow.
That works
It
really
is.
well against what you're talking about, where it's like diversity is really valuable in that global sense, where it's all types of diversity.
Right.
But if it's too diverse, well, then it's going to be hard to get them to work together.
That part.
Right.
And that's the whole thrust behind getting the person doing the personality assessments. We're looking at 24 different personality traits in 4 quadrants, and
Mm-hmm.
we there's a group score at the end. And you know, one of the things that we're looking at is the Department of Labor and EEOC here in the States says you can use a personality assessment, but the assessment has to be job related. And so everybody that comes in is compared to this standard, right?
Right.
If you do that, then you can use it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just trying to get people, lined up by a standard by which they, can get along better. And so in the states last year, I think it was last year, turnover loss was about $2 trillion.
Right.
And so the government's like, okay, we got to let these people use something more than Myers-Briggs. And people
Mm-hmm.
who use Myers-Briggs got sued because it's not job related.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple just got a $25 million fine for tampering with the applicant pool. They kind of went in the applicant pool, kind of plucked some folks out that met their criteria and left the rest behind. And somebody got wind of it and called Department of Labor. And
So the next one is, in your opinion, what are the key skills and competencies that leaders need to create a thriving organizational culture?
certainly, I'm not. I am an introvert and I'm an empath. So I work well with others who think like me. But from a CEO point of view, I like to see empathic, nurturing caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get the best response from the people who you serve if you are like that. If you remind them of a parent or some authoritarian style, I say it, you
Mm-hmm.
do it. And I don't care what you think. I've seen several folks like that. I've actually done the profiles of some CEOs, and it's like, wow. when you look at all the negative traits, it's like, how did you get to be CEO? But everybody's into this thing that oh, you need narcissism because they're bold and they're charged right in there. But yeah, but if you don't have the intelligence to match that, you're kind of wasting time. So
Yeah.
I see that people are more responsive to caretaking, nurturing, and empathic leaders versus authoritarian.
I'll give you one of the random ones now, and that is, if you could interview only one historical figure, who would it be, and what's the one question you'd ask?
My mentor from afar would be John Bradshaw. Uh, John Bradshaw introduced the theory of the inner child.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your adult and your inner child, and throughout the day we kind of swap. I guess the question I would ask him is, how can we control that inner child to to make it stay in place while I stay in my adult self?
Mm-hmm.
And I got tons of all of my books on the inner child. And it's interesting. Again, here's some applicable skills to the corporate world. Because if you have a bunch of people running around in their child state, here's the adult, and here's your child state's driving the steering wheel, and it can wreak havoc and chaos in the workplace. And so, yeah, I kind of want to know how do you control that in the workplace? How can you make it more harmonious again to stay as soon as you walk in the door, to go into your adult self and stay there for 8 hours, and then when you get out of it, you can do whatever you want to do. So,
Well, and
mhm.
that's impulse control, and that goes back to a lot of prefrontal cortex, Buddhist philosophy, mindset kind of things, that there are ways to do it, but anybody who tells me, oh, it's easy or I've mastered it, shy of being something like a Buddhist monk, and I don't buy that even they are there. They might be further along that path. And it's not because I'm religious, it's just because those techniques of mindfulness about stepping back, like, getting to yes with yourself, which was the guy who wrote Getting to Yes later wrote another book saying, well, getting to yes was okay, but you have to get to yes with yourself. And it was about, he talked about stepping out onto the balcony. So the dispassionateness that they would talk about in Buddhism, or the emotional distance of standing back and saying, okay, I'm upset about this. I am experiencing frustration. I'm experiencing anger rather than I am angry. Again, sort of the Buddhist idea. Uh, there are
Hmm.
tools, but none of them are effortless to use. Yeah. And like you said,
The
I'm coming from the neuroscience thing again.
right, and when I have a couple and who are about to scratch each other's eyeballs out, when they do the parallel escalation, it's not the adults in them that's fighting. It's the children on the
Hmm.
inside of them that they hit the top of the cycle. They do this toxic tailspin on the way down. They hit the ground, and the adult finally kicks in and goes, "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to call you that. I was wrong." The adult checks in, and it works for a while until one of the triggers are hit, and
Hmm.
then we go back into the cycle, right?
Right.
So I see that in I see that in boardrooms where
Of course.
you get this parallel escalation, and it's like, are there any adults in the room? Because we're all escalated, and the toxic tailspin on the way down, that's the worst part.
Hmm.
I'll fix you, or I'll get you back, or I'll do this. It's
Right.
like, how? And again,
Well,
parallels
yeah, yeah.
are
I get this. I get this. It really comes down to the same thing. Again, coming from surprise, surprise, neurobiology perspective, it's like we are never not still animals, and we are never not still so mature or so in self-control that we can't revert to that, like you said, the sort of the childish behavior. And that goes for everybody. And at least one of the good things about being aware of that is, like, it can happen to me too.
like.
All we can do is strive and continue to be better at it. The one book that pops up for me in my brain, which is excellent, is Crucial Conversations. And it's
Mhm.
specifically about it's sort of around the in from a corporate perspective, but it's a group, it's is it Joseph Grenny? Anyway, Vital Smart. So they're like a consulting organization, and he was one of the main guys is or was a professor of organizational psychology or something. Anyway, it's really
Mhm.
great. And the thing that I can think of right now is start with heart. That is really empathy. So it's about coming to conversations. Usually I think it's mostly focused on the corporate thing, but it could be personal too. It's like, look, this is something we really have to talk about, versus what I see, and I think is at least as bad, if not worse, is not talking about it at all. It's like, okay, we can't talk about anything bad. We can't say you're doing your job poorly until we're basically ready to fire you. It's like, in other words, you never gave them an opportunity to improve or fix along the way, or to find a solution and fix something along the way. It's like, avoid the conflict, avoid negative. Oh, if we say everything's positive, it will all become magically positive. It's like, no, there are things that aren't good that we need to talk about, and that's what Crucial Conversations talks about. I'd be happy
Yes.
to send you a link, but it's a great book about how to have those hard conversations.
I think it's interesting. Well, as we are in close proximity to one another, we emotionally regulate one another.
Oh, for sure.
Right. I think you in neuroscience call it mirror neurons. If
Yes.
I yawn, everybody in the room starts to yawn.
Right.
So, so it regulating that proximity and emotionally regulating each other in close proximity. No one looked at it. It's until you can give it some thought. See, and again, so if our personalities are similar, then that regulation becomes a lot easier.
Hmm.
Hey, can you help me with this project? Yeah, surely. Put this down. I can help you, achieve this thing that we're trying to do. And we're
Hmm.
in close proximity. I like you. We're not that far out of range. But
Right.
it was one reason I hated doing group projects because I knew there was going to be. I'm again introvert, and there's going to be this guy that was coming in who didn't read, held us up, and I'm like, and I told her, I said, I'd rather do all 6 projects by myself. You want to do that? I'm like, sure, yeah, cool. So that's what I would opt to do because I could rely on me. I knew I had an expectation. It was predictable. I knew what was going on. But when I had too many people in there and everybody had a part, if you don't do your part, it's going to affect our grade. See, I
Yes.
hate that.
Interesting. I can relate to that from the other side of this distribution, like I said. Ultra outgoing, I'm the guy to say, hey, you're doing nothing. And or go tell the instructor, which I've literally done. It's like he's just coasting. He's doing nothing in this project. It was like, well, everybody else was fine with him. It was like that just means nobody had the balls. Nobody was the troublemaker that I can be to say this isn't okay. He's not contributing. Therefore, I'm doing his work for him. So, and I'm on the opposite end. The only thing is you probably stewed about it because you wouldn't say it. I'm the guy who's saying what you're thinking that you wouldn't say. Like, what an ass. When we're talking about training, so let's talk about training for leadership and culture building.
I like to see, one of the things personality assessments does is it reveals proclivities. And I certainly would want a guy who had the person at not everybody has the personality to be a leader. So
Mhm.
again, the things that we measure, one of the proclivities is leadership. And so it has these certain qualities. I like to see what's in my pool first, and from my pool, I will extrapolate those who have the highest leadership scores, and
Mhm.
from there, we'll see who you kind of narrow your list down. And it's painstaking because if you have really strong people, um, the higher the score in my world, the more adult-like you are. The
Mhm.
lower the score, the more childlike you are. So we can definitively rank these folks in terms of leadership. Well, this guy scored a 77. This one scored a 67. Both of them are good. Neither one of them had any areas of concern. Which
Mhm.
one gives you the warm, fuzzy feelings the most?
Ideally, how often should this training take place?
I think you should inculcate. I mean, it should be, you know, in intervals to kind of keep it sharp, kind of keep it fresh. Now you can decide the length of the interval, but I certainly, repetition is the mother of skill. So
Mm.
as you inculcate, then that skill stays sharp, it stays intact. If it's taking into consideration all of the cultural diversity trainings, you know, um, I don't know, maybe 2, 3 times a year, definitely 3 times, 2 or 3 times a year. You kind of want to keep that, steel sharpens steel. So I certainly would want to do that more often than not.
Right.
Maybe
So
three.
let's say rainbows and unicorns. So 2 to 3 times a year, if I understand or I get your vibe on this, is 2 to 3 times a year at least.
Mhm.
Is that correct? Okay,
Yeah.
so what would be rainbows and unicorns frequency in terms of training like this?
Oh, every 4 months, maybe. That's 3 times a year, every 4 months.
Yes.
Uh, I don't know. It depends. If things are going well and everybody's cool and no one's complaining and the production is where it should be, I probably would leave it alone. Now, production starts to fall off and people are leaving and turnover is high and then I'd probably look at it. I wouldn't want to disturb it unless it needs addressing, to be honest.
Okay. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, so
Yeah.
what about on sort of the as a more discrete course? This is we want to get people up to speed. They're not up to speed, and let's be honest, in most organizational culture, there isn't speed. It's vulture culture. It's the default culture, the child culture, whatever you want to call it. The um I was going to say Children of the Corn, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. Lord of the Flies. Okay, the Lord of the Flies culture would sort of be your equivalent to my vulture culture. So let's say it's broken, and sadly, let's face it, a lot of organizations are, whether they acknowledge it or not. Okay, so we want to get them up to speed. So there's a discrete course which is going to take place for X amount of time, whether that's a few days, weeks, or months. And then, because what you're talking about, if I understand it correctly, is this is sort of maintenance when the ducks are mostly in a row, and you, as you said, you want to keep that axe or that sword or that skill sharp. So, what about a discrete course? What duration would you say that course should be, and what frequency with which should we apply that? That is, how frequently should we apply it to get people up to speed?
In order to get people, coming in, my assumption is that you have some speed with you, has to be assessed and evaluated. But getting people up to speed, hmm, well, I think during that 90 days that the company evaluates you, you evaluate the company. I know in North Carolina it's a free will
Mhm,
state. Normally you get about 90 days of a look before all of the other accoutrements of the job comes in, health benefits, life benefits, all that stuff.
mhm,
I would say probably 90 days to get them up to speed, because you have to sacrifice manpower,
mhm.
to help them along the way. Let's see, Hmm. 90. It should be, yeah, three. I think 3 months is enough.
How frequently should they be training?
Right. I think once a week would be where
Mhm,
you kind of come in and just you're it's kind of like you're building upon previous concepts,
mhm.
and you get a probably an assessment or a test
Right.
and build upon the previous concept. And weekly is a really good frequency. And you should probably have a cohort that the cohort model is going to kind of facilitate, we're all learning at the same time. So,
Right.
yeah.
So that may answer the next question. So I'm going to hit you with this one is which types of between session support would be most beneficial?
Oh, definitely cohort to meet you give them a project, a homework, and they meet. I love Zoom where you can
Hmm.
break people out into different rooms, and you kind of as a supervisor, you kind of check in the room to see how they're progressing with the problem,
Hmm.
and offer feedback. Yeah,
Right,
and
right, right.
and the cohort, I love the cohort model. These are people I came in with, and well, these are the people I'm going to stick with, and you can measure, cohort effectiveness, and you can look at trajectories and outcomes that are consistent with the goals and objectives of the company to make sure that they're on par.
Right. Okay, let's hit you with another random question. If you had to teach a class on one thing, what would you teach?
Yeah, I used to teach. The one class I taught was marriage and family therapy class, and it was on how to be married
Okay.
101. It was a fun class. I loved it. I remember having random people come up and we would do eye gaze, and you just sit there
Hmm.
gaze into each other's eyes for approximately 2 minutes, and you could hear a pin drop. There's a room of 70 students. I had 6 couples to do the eye gaze because one of the things that you need is part of your communication is how often do you look at your mate, your spouse, it's like, and say, hey honey, how you doing, so no, so
Hmm.
the eye gaze, and there's this tremendous energy exchange in this gaze. And after the 2 or 3 minutes was up, I would ask the first couple, what did you feel? I felt, this is weird. And the other person said, well, I thought this was really cool. And then I had them switch partners, right?
Hmm.
We did it again. And I said, what did you feel with the first one? I felt this one, but this guy was really interesting. And the other guy was saying, yeah, it was interesting. So we were learning, your first language as a child is energy.
Hmm.
And you could look at your mom's face and know that either you were in trouble or she was pleased. You looked here. This is what you looked at to kind of gauge that. So
Hmm.
we're kind of taking them back to a form of language that they, as we get words and we get more sophisticated, it kind of loses your touch. But the eye gaze and the energy exchange in marriage is critical. It's super critical. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the other type of training here. So how would you envision training, the kind of training we're talking about, like corporate leadership and culture building training, helping leaders address specific cultural and leadership challenges within an organization?
That's going to require a curriculum. I've done it before, but this when I wrote that thing, that was what, 2016. In this new day and age, it's so much more nuanced, and today would require a different curriculum because the times are changing. So you've got millennials are now purchasing houses versus Gen X versus Gen Y versus baby boomers. So you got it. The training has to be culturally relevant in terms of generation because millennials think way differently than baby boomers. And if you have a company that has both, then you certainly have to take that into consideration because that you ain't gonna have no group think there. Okay, so
Yeah.
it has to be relevant to the generation, and every 20 years takes a generation. So, and there's
Mhm.
some new variation that's coming out now. I forget because I can't keep up with it. So,
Um, there's a moral psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. He did a book called Coddling of the American Mind with I can't remember the other author, but it was more or less when it became about everybody feeling good rather than real feedback about how people are doing. You
oh,
don't have to beat
participation.
someone. Yeah, participation trophies. Like, I'm sorry, but I really love what Roy Baumeister said about this. It's like all we get, because he was on the front edge of that. They did some bad correlation, right? Somebody says, oh, look, high self-esteem, high achievement, or high success. But for some reason, nobody thought that perhaps those who have achieved a great deal or who are successful, therefore have high self-esteem. They just assumed the opposite. And for some reason, very unscientific, never questioned the direction of causation. So Roy Baumeister was one of the people at the front edge of this, and him and some of
Hmm.
his colleagues did a meta-analysis, and they says, oh, turns out that making everybody have high self-esteem makes them really narcissistic, to use your word. Like literally all you get is high narcissism but low achievement. He says we have a whole generation and now several generations of people who feel very good about doing very bad. It's like, I got 40 on my math test, but I'm special because my mummy says so.
Oh,
Like I'm just using that. That's my own invention. But the bottom line is that's what his research found. What he wound up doing is he wound up with willpower and self-discipline and how it
mm.
really works. He was the guy who did the stuff about cookies and radishes, if you're familiar with that. So the gist is willpower is finite. It's highly correlated with glucose. That is, if it's something that's hard for us to do and we got to use our adult brain, it consumes a lot of energy. And then when we have another task to do, and this has been shown like a lot of famous people, oh, I wear the same thing every day, so I don't have to decide because I'm going to save that energy for making harder decisions. There seems to be real evidence behind that because the people who had to eat the radishes while the cookies were right there and then solve an impossible to solve puzzle, they quit in 12 minutes versus the people who ate the cookies, that is, that didn't have to use their willpower. And they've even found the same thing with judges. If you ever go in front of a judge, try your damnedest to go immediately after breakfast or immediately after lunch because it shows, and this was in the case of parole hearings and that, right? So when there's more cognitive load, when people have to make more complex decisions, and it's easier to just say, no, you're not going to get paroled, is an easy decision. You just say no. You don't have to really consider the factors. You're saying, I'm not sure, so I'll just leave you in prison. Versus, oh, yeah, we'll let you go because I had to consider it. So what happens is you get this curve right after meals, you get a high parole rate. As the day goes on, it goes lower and lower. It basically follows probably like a blood sugar curve. It's
Oh,
just
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
and so yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So let's see here. I want to ask you one more and then some ones that I must ask. So uh considering the potential impact of the training we've been talking about, what pricing model do you think would be most appealing to your clients?
It depends on how many people are in the training. So, a group of 20, 30 people, probably somewhere in the range of 15, 20,000.
Mhm.
It certainly goes up if there are more participants. But, what are we looking at? Are we looking at rank and file? Are we looking at C-suite? C-suite's going to take a lot more energy to come
Mhm.
up to have a training with because they're on a different level and they have different concerns than rank and file. So it's a
Right.
different training. So it would be commensurate with the level.
You're right. And when you're dealing with leaders, they're sort of, in a sense, more of a pain in the ass because they'll
Of
think, well,
course,
I'm used to being right. Nobody tells me I'm wrong. Well, yeah, that's because they might get fired if they do, right? And then trying to tell them what they need to change or improve. So that can be a real challenge. What type of pricing model that is? How is it charged? Whether it's a one-time fee up front, on deliverables, as a subscription model, and so on. So I got the number. So how would you invoice them for that?
how big is the fire? So I mean, if I'm putting out a forest fire, this is a 5 alarm fire, then the price is certainly going to be commensurate.
Mhm.
If if there isn't a fire, then again, we're going to readjust. Yeah, but if it's an inferno, yeah, that's
Okay, but how would you charge them for said Inferno or said Sparks? That is, would you charge them as a monthly subscription? Would you wait until certain metrics are deliverable? So it's like we need to reduce our turnover by 10% and you will get paid X amount. So, right, like I'm talking about the pricing model rather than the pricing number.
if we're going to inculcate and again, the more repetition, the higher the cost. If we're
Right.
putting out, if we're trying to hit a goal, yeah, that's going to be a a repetition model. If we're
Okay.
inculcating, yeah, we're definitely
And
gonna.
how would you charge on that? The reason I ask this question is, for your clients, it could be entirely different, but some corporate clients just go, look, we have the money. Money is not the issue here. We just want to pay it in this quarter, or for our bookkeeping, it's easier just to pay for it all up front and then expect you to deliver. Other ones say we won't give you anything. Usually smaller operators won't operate that way. And other ones are going, we want to have you on retainer with a subscription. So what kind of pricing model? The number
Oh,
is
I see.
important, but how do you charge them? Do you charge them upfront once, on the back end once, by deliverable, monthly, weekly, whatever?
For the subscription, half up front, and the other half at the end of our journey. You
Okay,
you you can't go in there just you know with all your training. You got to stay in a hotel. You got
okay,
transportation to the office. Yeah, you need at least half that up front. And what I find is most folks are cool with that half up front,
right.
and then at the end of our 6 week journey, we get the other half.
Okay, great. Yeah, see, that's like I said, I'm surprised the variety of answers I've got to that question. So now let's flip this script. If you were that recipient of the training, how would you prefer to be charged for it?
I like to pay for it all up front
Mhm.
and get it out the way. I don't. I hate accounting, so I keep it simple.
If we automate something, and that's one of the things about willpower, the people who do really well with willpower, people who we think of having really good willpower, mostly what they have is really good habits. It's like his research showed, surprise, surprise, that like push-ups, the more you exercise your willpower, the stronger you can make it. And that's
Right.
the more you exercise your grown-upness, the better you are at it. But on the flip side, the more you make a system so that you don't have to use it, the more you have it when you really need it.
Yes.
Right.
And
So
you
you
better
preserve
have
that
it.
willpower for the critical situations rather than the
Right.
daily. Yeah.
I agree with that. Yes.
Okay. So next one. Who do you know who could benefit from being interviewed by me on these topics? That is leadership training and organizational culture change and growth.
I think newly minted CEOs, and if on LinkedIn, you certainly can. If you're in Sales Navigator, you can see the people who are newly appointed.
Hmm.
Been in this position for a couple of weeks now, and they're getting used to everything. I think it would be optimal to get
Right.
them right as they are trying to figure out, who's around. And I also like to get them at that early stage. And I also say, hey, let's do an assessment of everybody in your circle so that you can know what you're dealing with. You need to know the personalities of everybody around you because some
I
people are
like
going to
that.
like you, some people are going to hate you, some people are going to be indifferent. You need to know what you're dealing with.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Now I'm going to get more specific about that because um, that's good. I see that as a real opportunity in terms of my marketing. What my The specifics of my question is, who do you know? That is, oh yeah, I know this guy named Tim Green who's really into neuroscience. Da, da, da.
Oh,
So I'm talking about actual individuals who might benefit from or resonate with this interview. That is, it would be beneficial for them and they would have something to, bring value and insight into this interview.
right. I would have to flip back through not off the top of my head. I would have to flip back through my LinkedIn because I do actually keep up with folks who are newly minted into their positions.
Right, right. So yeah, please, we're already connected. I think that's where we started, right? Is
Yeah.
we connected through LinkedIn, right? Okay. So now I'm going to flip this script and go, who do you know who is looking for guests who can speak on these topics? That is, I become the guest of somebody else who has a podcast. You probably get the gist of sort of what I do and how I do it.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
about
wonderful.
cultural transformation and from the perspective of neuroscience, basically.
And the I well, because I'm an introvert, my bubble is pretty uh, thick, and I this is me venturing out of my bubble.
Hmm.
Do I know some other folks who could benefit? Yeah, I gotta look through because as I close deals, um, I kind of look around to see could this person benefit from some training. So I
Right.
have to look back at my list
Right.
and
Well,
get to you.
and one of the reasons I asked both these questions, yes, it's the direct benefit I might receive from it, but also it was like it is an implicit question about how much value you got out of this or whether you felt this was worth your time, right? It's like
Mhm.
you're not gonna recommend anybody. It's really social proof. And like I said, it would be more like one of those implicit questions on the personality assessment where the answer is not obvious, but it's being asked. It was like, is Tim a tinfoil hat wearing nut? Or let's see, maybe I want to find. Oh, I can't see it right now. I actually have a hat. It's not lined with tinfoil, but it's a hat. Oh, I found it. It's a hat for just jokes, but also, if you want to do some quick and dirty explanation of certain basic neuroscience, visual aid is never a bad thing. So I got that hat, but I'm not a tinfoil hat wearing nut. So yeah, I think that's important, right? Because it's like
Sure.
I don't want to do this. I want to bring value to you. Otherwise, why are we doing this? Okay. Couple more, and then we're finally finished. Okay, so the next one is, what questions or frustrations do you have about transforming organizational culture and leadership?
Well, in my space, what I'm trying to facilitate is this paradigmatic shift, and people are remaining attached to old technologies that are simply not working. And I'm trying to get them out of that orbit into here's the newest technology, but people are they feel underprepared to deal with AI. AI is a new animal. AI
Hmm.
is going to replace me. AI is going to put me out of business. AI is going to and I'm like, no, AI is going to help you. And so if the one thing I could wish I could get them to do, that AI is your friend right now. And early adapters are going to reap the rewards. People who are coming in under some type of duress, they're going to pay a lot more money. So being
Hmm.
proactive now and look at what's going on versus being reactive later on, where
Right.
it's going to cost you a lot more money.
I'm with Gary V on that one. The robots will take over, just not yet. In the meantime, it's for our benefit. Like I've read a number of books by like actual experts. The guy who programmed Deep Mind, I just finished a book called The Coming Wave, listening to it. It's scary as hell, but it was the same as The Age of AI, which I read and reviewed years ago. And it was sort of like, you know, AI is creating things that have never existed, that no human in all of human history. So if you think, oh, they can't do my job, I'm special, ultimately you're delusional, because it's like um there's a drug called Halocin. An AI found a drug. It basically created a novel model of pharmacology that no human had ever thought of, and then created a new antibiotic. So yeah, the robots are going to take over. If we think we're smarter than them, then we're dumber than we think we are, because they're already better than the best Go player, better than the best doctors at analysis. Within narrow AI, yes, Chat GPT still makes stupid mistakes, but like I said, an AI beat the best Go player in the world with a new strategy that no human in all the history of the game had ever thought of. Then another AI, which was self-teaching, AlphaGo beat the Lee Sedol or whatever, beat the world champion. Then along comes AlphaGo Zero, was self-trained basically. Then it was true machine learning. And AlphaGo Zero beat the world champion AI, which was the world champion period, 100 games to 0. Now, let's go back. Oh, yes, where we have this special creativity that nothing else can do. It's like our brains are an emergent system, and we're getting to the point that we can do something similar enough in hardware that has went beyond what any human has ever done. It's lacking humility for us as a species to decide or to think that it can't be better than us, because already much of it is.
As I experienced the interview, I think this is perfect. I kind of like the free flow, and I do like the random stuff because I need to
Mhm.
be on my toes because I'm if I'm in front of a board or some CEOs, that I'm going to get some random stuff. So I think this is preparation to kind of get me into the mindset of, hey, how well do you think on the fly, and are you are you like you said earlier, are you genuinely, do you know your stuff? So
Mhm.
yeah, I love it. I wouldn't change a thing.
Wow, thank you. And I really love what you said there about it occurred to me now I could position it or tell people, well, if you want something to practice thinking on your feet about that which you do, come on to my interview because I'll put you there. Because it's true that what I do is if you say something, it's like, oh, well, hold on, either that's not what I asked or different than, I failed to communicate it well. It's different than what I intended. So please tell me about that. Like when you start talking about distributions, like, okay, Gaussian distributions, got it. What does this mean for the average person who cares about that? Not at all. And then we went back, right? So that's really good. It's really good training for me. And I'm always trying to evolve the questions and the clarity because some people go, oh yeah, I understand. Other ones are going, what? Can you repeat that again? People who learn something new get very confident that they really know a lot. And then over time, this starts to fall down and taper off as they actually get their PhD or they spend 10 years of self-learning. Suddenly, they're not so damn confident anymore. So I think that probably happens with us all in everything. We learn something new, we're overly confident, and then we learn more and go, oh, well, I didn't know about these nuances. It's not so simple anymore,
No,
right? And we get
yeah,
humility.
yeah, you should always be learning. I mean, I try to do a book a week.
Mhm.
If you're trying to keep up with, to mega trends and things that are going on, and I just read, I read tons of articles that CEOs are now saying that personality is the thing that they're looking for now, and not
Okay.
so much skill set. Because if you got this wonderful skill set, but you have the personality of a honey badger, I really don't want you here. I don't care how talented you are. So, yeah, but give
Right.
me a guy that has a great personality, and I'll train him in the way that I want him to go, the skill set.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Very
well,
true. Very true. And I like the reference of the honey badgers. How could I make this interview better for our audience?
the folks who are looking to improve, I like living off of other people's mistakes because it's way more efficient for me.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I get to come in and oh, when I did it this way, this is, so I like to extrapolate that kind of information. Um, so that this audience is probably somewhere in that, always constantly learning, constantly learning new information, because if AI is doubling information, what, every 90 days. So it's trying to keep up with that, and being on the cutting edge, on the precipice of new information. It never gets old, and I like that, and I love the format. This
So
is
you're
like,
saying, can I extrapolate from that? And I'm sorry, I actually missed one question, so there is one more after this, but then
okay.
we're done. Okay, so it was how could I make this interview better for the audience? So are you saying, Tim, stay on the cutting edge, keep reading 1 or 2 books a week?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
You can fall behind just like that. And I like seeing it coming. I don't want to be I like to be proactive.
right,
I don't want to be reactive. Reactive is
right.
not good.
And that's where I have to, despite their success and despite the wisdom they have that I lack, going back to Hormozy and Gary Vee, is yes, they make it they're good at communicating with people. They seem to have good empathy, though Harmosi's more like, quit your whining, bitch. Just suck it up, buttercup, and do the work. And I agree with him because most people, right, they want to wish or manifest things. It's like, yeah, that's not the way quantum physics actually works. Um, but um, they're sort of, oh, well, do it yourself and figure it out for yourself. It's like, so what you're saying is your experience is so unique that there isn't somebody else who spent their lifetime getting their own experience, which you could learn from by reading their book. That's what both of those guys, I think, in a sense, are really missing. They're like, as much as you think, screw
Mm,
books, screw education, is like, remember that a lot of very smart, hardworking people have spent their whole life, like Daniel Kahneman, learning things that you don't know yet. And you can take 7 hours on average, 8 hours on average to learn what they know. And you're saying you'd rather learn that from experience? So we need both. Absolutely. It's got to apply to the real world, but other
yes.
people have experienced the real world and summarize all of their experience or a large part of it into a book that you can read in one day.
Right. So it's so much more efficient. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're really trying to be out there,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
cutting
So
edge.
now the final question is, how could I make this interview better for you?
Again, I can't see any areas of improvement. Hmm. I don't know. I like it as it is.
Hmm.
I do, and it. I like the randomness of the questions. I like the pace, and I knew it was going to. The fact that we're going 2 hours means that we kind of covered a broad,
Hmm.
number of topics, and this is the kind of stuff I listen to when I'm on 85 going to Greensboro. I love. I'm always listening to talk shows and stuff, so I
Hmm.
think the format's perfect
Nice.
for it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice because it tells me I'm on the right path. But these are the questions I'm never going to stop asking because
Sure.
somebody's going to see something. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, Leonard, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.